Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I know that we're getting to the end of, for some people, 3 very long but exciting and hopefully fulfilling days. This is going to be a really interactive session. We have got an amazing panel, which I'll introduce in a second. But today is, I promise you, only 3 slides. This is the second one, right? Today is interaction time. You've been listening to people for a long hours today. I really want you to ask lots of questions of our panel. We're going to kick off with some conversation, and everyone will introduce themselves. So, who are our panelists? I'm going to start with me. My name's Jamie Ragen. I am the manager of solution consulting at Adobe, and at Adobe Australia and New Zealand. I look after some creative and document cloud experts, and we represent the interpretation between your businesses and our products. And we love to come out and see you guys. So my email is very easy. It's ragen@adobe.com. You're more than welcome to email me, get us to come out and do sessions with you guys. A lot of people don't realise that as Creative Cloud members, you have access to us to do sessions with your teams. And we'd love to come and spend time with you. I'm going to introduce Hoyle, and then we'll move around. Sorry, this is not Hoyle, by the way. Yes, this is why. Anyway, well, you could introduce as someone else, but Hoyle Wang is one of our product managers, and then we might move around and introduce ourselves.
Cool. Hey, I'm Hoyle. I'm one of the product managers for Adobe XD. Based out of San Francisco, but love coming here to Sydney and super excited to be here and talk to you guys today.
I'm James Noble. I'm that guy. I run a experience design agency that started in UX and slowly evolved out of there. So that's why I assume I'm on the panel.
Hi everyone. My name is Bridget Burton. I look after the experience design team at NAB. And you've got a microphone. Well played.
A microphone. I'm also Hoyle. No. I'm Tim Boosing, Group Design Director at Fjord, which is part of Accenture Interactive, and I'm also representing the partnerships that Fjord has globally, or at least in the ANZ APAC region. So Jamie and I have been working together already on the XD prototype. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first things first, I got these photos straight from LinkedIn, and the creative people are in black and white, and the Adobe people are in colour. I'm not sure what that means. I also like the balance that we have with 2 hats just off centre. So I wanted to open up the conversation today, and I really want it to be a conversation, but I'm going to ask each of our panellists to talk a little bit about past and present user experience design, but not from a lens of how do we create a button and what should it look like, but more at a higher level in, developing teams. How has it evolved from the first days of creating HTML and making websites look beautiful with tiled backgrounds and logos, all the way to now these completely interactive, multiple screens, content design that is targeted at people. How do we cope with that? I'll start with myself, and I come from a print background. I started life as a cartoonist like many years ago in daily newspapers, and user interaction design for me was top right-hand page was the best real estate. Big headlines meant that it was an important story, and that's what we wanted people to actually look at. Advertising was sold in column centimetres, and once you got 5 pages deep, it just was the same column centimetre rate, but back page costs more. This was still user interface design. I would pick up the newspaper and turn to the back and read the sport, and my wife would pick up the newspaper and read the front and then turn to the middle and read the gossip column, right? It was sort of targeted, right? We all knew where that stuff was. We knew what to expect and how to get to that information. And then along comes this crazy thing. This is one of the coolest things that ever happened to me was, in the old days we used to have readers in the newspaper, and they would actually go through and read the articles, and each one of those articles would have a little take number, and it would be some random computer-generated number so that we could track it with a version number on the end. And at the bottom of the article, sometimes that take number would be at the bottom, so when they get to the bottom of a long article, they knew what it was. And we kept getting this galley of text, we call it galleys in the old days, and it would keep coming back because the reader was scrubbing this thing out. It was like www. And then the name of the business.com, and the reader kept scrubbing it out and sending it back to be deleted. And then whoever was they were like, why are you deleting this thing? They're like, well, it's the take number. They're like, no, it's the website. They're like, what's a website? Right, so even at that early stage, there was obstacles to come across. Even trying to get people to actually go onto the internet, there was those obstacles. The obstacles haven't really changed. So that's my little background story. Have you got any interesting background stuff?
So now that you've used the Wayback Machine for print, I'm going to go back to the first big pitch that I won back in Germany, in my native country, for a big department store. And I basically won it on the basis of understanding information hierarchy and where navigation should sit on a website and so on. And that was, I do remember the client, just recently, I remember the client being so enthused by that because they also had no clue whatsoever. And you could basically just win on the basis of knowing where to put stuff on a web page. Now we've always evolved, and obviously visual taxonomy and hierarchies are well understood in content, and now we're in a very exciting place where we're actually looking at massive personalization, customization, things that are highly data-driven and highly engaging simply on the basis of being everywhere, right? It's not so much a web page anymore, it's just content, it's just a service, and it happens to be delivered in whatever shape, size, format, context, moment of time you actually want it. So that's very exciting, but it's also gotten incredibly complex, and thanks to software and partners, we can obviously sort of make it a little bit easier, but it also requires a lot more understanding on the client side.
Thank you.
If I think about history, I think about the fact that we talk about user experience being a really new industry, that we're young, and I think, yeah, it's only been about 30 years, right? That is young. And then you've got people like Michael who stood up yesterday and said, yeah, user experience really new, 5 to 6 years, you know, and a group executive at NAB who says, yep, user experience really new, 2 to 3 years. And I'm thinking, it's been 30 years, right? Where were you guys 30 years ago, where we were kind of usability consultants and information architects and interaction designers and all of these kind of labels that we've given ourselves over the years? And I find that really interesting, that what we as an industry, and I'm sure all of you guys out there are going, okay, well, I might not have known about it 30 years ago, but maybe I knew about it like 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And that's kind of our experience here in the room. But when you go particularly into big organisations like NAB, and I'm sure for you guys a lot of the corporate organisations that you're either going into as consultants or that you go into from an agency or a consulting point of view, it's seen as so new. Wow, it's this whole new thing that you guys are doing. And I'm thinking, there's a real disconnect here. And I'm fascinated in how we kind of bring some people up to speed in the most basic, tenets of our industry, which is that we've actually been around a bit longer than you might think.
Mm-hmm. You're just making me think of that then. I was like, in my mind, I'm still not sure where. It's been 30, 40 years. It came around either through Xerox, which we were debating in the late 70s, or it was IBM that brought it through with the HCI, human-computer interaction. My first experience with it was, if you remember, e-learning. So we used to call user experience e-learning before it wasn't as cool back then. Everything had an E or an I in front of it. And it slowly evolved. It was trying to work out how to bend and manipulate the tools that we had to create what we wanted. I know that I was a graphic designer as well and a web designer, and I didn't know which way I liked to go. And you used to have to try and bend the products to make it work in the way that you wanted it to deliver that idea. And as we've evolved and changed over the years, and we've decided to sort of mature as an industry, it's become the platforms that we use have become less of a constraint to deliver the idea. Is that a way of saying it?
It's like the barrier to entry, right?
Yeah, the barrier to entry has become easier. But what has happened with the barrier to entry becoming easier is that more people are doing it that aren't actually paying attention to the detail. So as we've grown, we've also got a little bit sloppy as a business sector, and now we're just slowly starting to regroup and get it back together again. So it's kind of changed over the years, and it's taken all sorts of form, from human-computer interaction to e-learning to UX, and even now, like I don't know what to call. When some of my teams start, I don't know what to call them because I don't know what title they like to have and how it fits, because it's so diverse now. It's not UX anymore. You're specialists in. It's segregated, split off into much more fields again. So it's evolved a lot, and it's an exciting time for us to things such as XD coming out. I'm not trying to advocate or sell the idea, but I like the fact that everyone's trying to talk to us to figure out what we would like it to be rather than trying to push something on us to use. So it's good.
I guess starting on a more personal note, so I remember the first time that I really encountered any topics related to user experience designs. When I was a kid, I was part of this program, and we made a trip to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And there I saw this talk by this guy named Randy Pausch, who wrote a book called The Last Lecture, but he was essentially a professor, I came to find out later, of human-computer interaction, and it was a book about how to achieve your childhood dreams. And I never really had a hero growing up. I never really was into Superman, Batman, and all that, but Randy was a really great guy. And I really looked up to him, and the values that he had were the same ones that I knew I wanted to have. So then, fast forward a couple of years, actually recently, I was reading his book again. Come to realize he was a professor of human-computer interaction, and created this game where kids could learn how to program with objects and drag and drop as opposed to code. So I was reading his book, and I had already started working here, and there was this one specific section where he talks about the first lecture that he has in his class every single year. So he comes out, there's a big table, and he puts a VCR on it, and he says to the entire class, people that make VCRs create this thing that is super, super complicated and nobody knows how to use, and it's so frustrating. And when you leave here, you'll have the ability as designers, as technologists, to create things for people. So when you're doing that, think of all the tired, frustrated masses and don't create VCRs. And then he smashed it with a sledgehammer. And I think that's
Hang
the
on,
thing.
he actually smashed it with a sledgehammer?
Yeah.
That's cool. We should have organised that, man. You
Very
could have
American
reenacted
thing. But I think
Bit
Baymax,
but I think that's the thing I always think back to. I think these guys all work in design, and I work in product management, but very much with a design bent, and that's something that I'm always thinking about, whether it's delivering the product that we build or helping others to build products, is to build things that we're building things for people. And that's the way that it's always been, and that's the way that it always should be. And things should be intuitive and simple, and you shouldn't have to have a manual that's the stick in order to figure things out. So, yeah, I think that it's really funny and ironic that I ended up doing the exact same thing as my childhood hero, but that's the story I always think back to when I think of design.
That's awesome. I want to get the Wayback Machine. Thank you for the reference. And fast forward to present day, and we were talking around with my family. I have teenage kids, which has all different sorts of weird, wonderful challenges. But they were talking about, my daughter was talking about how Snapchat they'd changed the interface again, and how it's terrible. It doesn't work anymore. It's not. She wasn't actually talking about the design. She was actually just saying it had changed and it doesn't work anymore. So I want to pose a question to the panel around end user expectation of creativity, and sometimes we have to bust down the barriers. Of course, within a couple of hours, she was an expert in the new design of Snapchat, and they were gone from being negative sentiment to now it's just the run of the mill. This is just how it's done. And so pose two questions. One is around end user expectation, and how do how do we stay in front of that expectation? And the other one is, how do we execute on that expectation? Certainly, I can imagine with a product like NAB has for your app for example, if you were to change one thing slightly and get negative sentiment, it might mean that traffic leaves and goes somewhere else. So yeah, the end user expectation. How do we manage it? And then also, how do you execute? We have to change, right? And how do we execute on that? Anyone?
I can start.
Thank you.
Look, I think yes, you should look at the hallways at NAB whenever we release something to the public, and yes, inevitably, they don't like it. And why don't they like it? Well, we don't like change. People don't like change. Change is hard. People are lazy. I mean, we know this, right? And so you've got to calm the farm every time you release something, and you go, do you know what, guys? We do record MPS. It's the system that we happen to use. It's going to go down. It's absolutely going to go down. We would be miracle workers if it did not go down. But do you know what? We've done the right thing. We've chatted to our customers. We've made sure that what we've designed is what they need. Might not be what they want right now, but it's what they need. And that's the other distinction that you've got to work with, right? And it's going to go up again. And what it should do, if we did our job right, is that not only will it go to where it was before we release the change, but it'll actually extend past that. So when your daughter was using Snapchat and they changed the interface and she was like, I hate it, right? And then you said a couple of hours later it was run-of-the-mill. Was it run-of-the-mill better than what the old run-of-the-mill was? Or was it
I just think that so there was new features that were introduced. They were using the new features. I don't think they think in terms of it's better.
Yeah.
It now it just feels normal. Was her, like I was saying to her, well, you seem to be using it, selfieing away to all of her, all of her friends, and it was just normal.
Yeah.
Did it just become normal?
Yeah, and look, I think there are lots of different approaches and strategies for how you deal with that, because you know that people don't like change. You know that it's going to be a negative sentiment to start with. So it's how you best manage that, and it's how you best. I try and ignore the noise from the nervous people that go, it's going down. I'm like, stop looking at it. Come back to it in a couple of months and it'll be just fine. Just stop looking at it for now. But more importantly, forget about those guys. How do we minimise the impact on our customers? How do we get the cadence right so that we are delivering things in line with their expectations, but not so fast that they're learning a completely new interface 3 times a week? How do we go through digital transformations that give us the power to release things very, very quickly and then not, right? And make deliberate decisions to release things slightly more slowly. So I'm not sure I've got a good answer for that, but it's certainly something that bears a lot of thinking about. And the people in your marketing teams and your change to market specialists and your change specialists shouldn't be the only ones thinking through that. It needs to be people from a user experience point of view that are partnering with those teams to make sure that we are imagining how to make that change land as best we possibly can, not for our NPS scores, not for our executives that are biting their nails in the corner, but for the customers that are actually using the thing.
I think our attention span has shrunk some with the inclusion of having a phone in your pocket that you can answer questions quickly, and I think that also is then relate onto our patience, like a level of patience with new interfaces and design. Our expectation for it to be perfect immediately has increased, so we're kind of making it harder for ourselves and for our audiences to understand the platforms that we're creating. I remember the very first time I used Snapchat myself, and I got confused and annoyed with it, saying, this is a rubbish interface, what's going on? And it took me about 10 minutes to realise, maybe I'm not the audience. Uh-huh. And it's that's what you got to start to remember now. I don't think of myself as old.
I'm pretty sure if you've got grey in your beard, you're not the audience, man.
Unfortunately.
You're an old white guy.
I know, I'm an old white guy. And that was then, right, so I just need to figure out and ask. And I feel like my dad. I'm like, I was at a conference in France, and I was just like, so I turned to someone who looked like they were very astute at it, some 20-year-old, and just asked them, how do you use this thing? Oh God, have I been that guy already? And then as soon as it clicked, and they're thinking of it a different way. It's about engaging with the right audience and asking the right questions. And like you say, when your audience drop when you give a new release, it's about that expectation, like from the marketing point of view of building the expectation of what the new release is going to be before it happens, rather than just surprising an audience. And then also giving them, knowing that you've got to try and get past where you're going to drop, and you need to internally give that expectation. It's going to drop, like it will, but then will it pick up, or has this improved? And then also telling the audience that it's going to happen before it happens, so that they can be ready before it suddenly has an auto update, which most people's phones are set to, I think. So it's kind of change, and iteration is the key to success, right?
Yeah, I remember a story with a client recently where one of my team members was incredibly ingenious by bringing in the feed from the App Store into our Slack channel. So I'm getting a bit technical here, but what it basically did was it was a direct voice of the community updating the app into our working environment, our teamware, which meant that we almost perceived the customer as a real team member. They were immediately telling us like, hey, wait a minute, this crashed, or this feature is still not there. So this is just one of the many channels how you can ask your customers, sort of bring it into your team, do regular sessions with them, qualitative sessions, and then just like Facebook and Amazon and eBay and all these people do, try to release small batches of changes continuously rather than making these big whopping changes. Sure. So you have some idea of where it's going to go and what's going to help.
So I have a question around this, and this comes from another customer that was doing these types of updates based on customer feedback. And what was interesting was they worked out that the people that were feeding back negative sentiment were the vast minority of the people that they were servicing. And as they were making these changes, more and more people started to complain. As in, they were making more and more, as they were changing it, more going back, the delta got bigger, more and more people were complaining. They were trying to fix it on the fly, whereas really it was more around the original idea, everyone seemed to like it. There was a small vocal minority that were...
Yeah, that's obviously a risk, that you don't weight it accordingly to what it really is, so it can't be the only source. You also should always remember what your original proposition is, and you can't totally pivot from that in one go. Obviously, you need to adapt and sort of bring in new use cases, new audiences, segments, maybe new sort of ideas, maybe something that you transpose from another industry that you might have seen in the entertainment industry, and how can we make good use of that in a completely different industry. But you shouldn't overweight something just because they're the loudest. I do remember in this app review feed, there was one person in particular who hated every update. It was just incredible. And then we almost felt like calling that person and saying like, can you just come in and sort of work through with all these issues with us? And it turned out that actually he was quite dissatisfied with the whole product in a different way, and he was just sort of projecting that into the app reviews that he was continuously writing.
Because it was probably the only place for him to voice it, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm interested in hearing Hoyle, because it's a fast iteration process. XD is launching like every month now, right?
Yeah, so I mean, if you really look at the way that Adobe as a company has built software, it used to be box software that you bought, once every 2 years. Maybe you bought it, maybe you got it off of, some other means.
Back when we used to be able to pirate it.
My boss is in the back. I'm trying to so I think we've gone from that to now. We came out of our 1.0 in October of last year, and every single month, leading up into that point when we were in beta, and every subsequent month after that, we do monthly releases, and they're not small things either. But I think that's one of the biggest challenges is that when you do monthly releases and you're rolling it out, it's an awareness thing. Like the power users are the ones that keep reading what's the what's news, the blogs, and so it's how do you keep those people who are not necessarily doing that up to date on what's going on the features that they can have. Another thing is I think talking again about this vocal minority piece, one of the things that we pride ourselves a lot on is having a really solid, stable, performant platform. And I recently had a project with both of our mobile apps, which is for live device preview, where we didn't do any sort of proactive app rating process. And so the only app ratings that we had were when users were frustrated with something, be it a feature request, be it something not quite working to their expectations. And the rating was an average of 2.4 out of 5 on both app stores, which, given the context of wanting something to be reliable and performant, was not acceptable. And so it was interesting. We did a project where we just sort of subtly, if you were a user that had used it a couple times in a week, we threw up the generic iOS or Android dialog that says, hey, are you enjoying using Adobe XD? If so, please rate it. If not, don't worry. And over the course of 2 months, it went from 2.4 to 4.4 on iOS and 4.2 on Android. So I think it's really important to not only listen to the customers, but know which kind of feedback to listen to, which kind of feedback to not listen to. Because you're always going to have people that are unhappy, and those people will often be the loudest people in the room. But I think it's really easy to critique something, right? When we're making decisions and for our users, it's really keeping a pulse on what it is that people want. I mean, the last time James and I spoke was maybe even February. We were talking about something, and I was in a conference room on FaceTime on my phone, and he was commuting in Melbourne to pick up his kid from daycare and holding on to the rails of the train and talking. But that's the kind of thing that we have to do,
Discussing features that would be nice to be included in XD.
So yeah, I think it's really having, at least for me, I keep a Rolodex of people that I have on speed dial, more or less.
You have a Rolodex?
That's what I was going to say. There's people in this audience that would never know where Rolodex is, man.
Well, I was starting talking about VCR as
like
Rolodex
back last century.
But yeah, I think it's really important to just keep those users front and center and know which types of feedback to really listen to and what's constructive feedback when you hear it.
Awesome. Has anyone got any questions? We are going to get to future soon, but before we get out of our way back machine and get into the future machine, has there anyone got any questions around sort of past or present things they'd like to ask the panel? I can't see anyone putting hands up.
How many people are using XD? You're actually on the tools yourselves? And how many people have got team members that use XD? So it's slowly adapting.
Sure.
Because we use both. We've been using Sketch a lot, and XD, and we've been using. I'm probably railroading your.
No, go
position.
for it, man.
But it's just interesting to see how many people are actually starting to apply it and use it, and starting to become part of it. Because there's a change in the way that we work as user experience designers, right? Like we're always a little bit, like anything, if there's something new, you're a bit hesitant to start to get on board. But what's been nice about Adobe is that since I did a talk with them and met with you a couple of years ago, that they keep just dropping in to see how things are going. It's got that humanized approach to it, which is exciting because it's not just being delivered to us. You can't always do we're not all Steve Jobs. We can't just go, I'm going to tell you what you want. Sometimes it's like, what do you need? And then once there's enough consensus as an industry, that can start to be considered to be applied. So it's been quite nice to be in that position now where we're actually getting a little bit of input to shape the products that we're using.
So I'd like to turn it to staff and people that are using user experience design. How hard is it to get good designers that can fit into? Is it a hard thing? How is everyone finding it to get the right people? Like, is there an industry? It seems to be accelerating very fast. There's loads of things, loads of studies saying it's the fastest, right? So
yeah. I'm about to answer that question, but guys, we could rattle on about anything. Honestly, if you've got a question, as we rattle on about this one, think about it and hop up and ask us, please, because I'd much prefer to talk about what you guys want to talk about here. But in answer to that question, actually, you and I were talking about it, I think, the other night, Jamie, that LinkedIn at the start of this year named user experience and user interface design as the 5th most in-demand skill in the world at the moment, right? Now, I did re-look up that this morning because I knew someone would go, well, what's number one?
What is number one?
Number one Cloud architects is number one, and number two is data scientists, and then I forgot 3 and 4. But point is, 5th most in-demand skill in the world right now. And I was looking that up because I was actually trying to understand what attrition should look like for my team, right? Because globally, across every industry, if you're under 10%, you're about average. 9 point something % is what you should be expecting turnover of your teams every year. And my team's at about 15, which is not great. But then I read that 23.3% is the attrition of user experience professionals. Why? Because we are the 5th most in-demand skill set in the world. There are more people than, there's more jobs than people.
Yeah.
You can pick and choose. You're in very high demand. Well done you on choosing this industry. And it's hard. As an employer, it's hard. If anyone was or has been actively looking, you might have seen 8 job roles go out from my team alone at NAB in the last few weeks. And that wasn't for 8 designers, that was for 38 designers. I needed multiple of each. I mean, it's a huge... I can't find 38 designers at one time in Melbourne, let me tell you.
Wow. You could outsource it to an experience agency.
This is true,
Nice
this is
work.
true. We could augment our workforce. It's really hard. And not only is it because we're in demand as an industry, we still have a crisis of conscience and we don't really know what to call ourselves. And so you've got lots of different labels and people kind of coming still into the industry from other areas, and then we don't know what to do with those people necessarily, right? We've got huge amounts of graduates coming out of things like Academy XI and General Assembly and all of those sorts of courses because the universities haven't caught up yet. And we often don't really know what to do with those guys either, at least internally within NAB, because all of the projects that we work on are like, well, I need a senior or a lead and I need them to be like on and going right now. And it's not a 3 or a 4 person project where you supplement with kind of mid-weight and more junior resources. And so we've got huge demand, more jobs than people, but the kind of people that particularly that we need is often a bit more skewed towards kind of the senior or the lead, which doesn't give us great pathways. It doesn't give us good progression. It doesn't give the more junior designers within the industry the ability to move up. It doesn't give the people that have a lot of experience in other areas coming into the industry good pathways and good progression to sort of come in. So it's kind of a mixed bag from my side at the moment. But it's hard. We're hotly in demand, which is fantastic. But it's hard. It's hard for an employer.
It's the hit the ground running thing, right? Like there's not much opportunity to start to get into it and then get up to speed. The expectations, because we're in such demand, is you have to get from here to here as fast as possible, or already be there when you start. Or even the onboarding of a team member, that you normally already got 3 projects from the start before they even started work. And we're also in Australia. I remember I'm not originally from Australia, but when I first got here, the consensus in England was that Australia was a decade behind in everything. That was the running joke. And it's slowly, I've been here 20 years now, and it's kind of gone, you know what, it's about 2 years behind, not because we want to be or that we're not aware of everything. It's just more that because of the industry is a little bit smaller and the pool is not as big as Europe or as America, that there's not much opportunity to get up to speed and to have that exposure to multiple types of projects and just get everyone involved in the same level. And that's kind of where we are. I think I quite often, when we're hiring people, it's trying to find, there's plenty of user experience designers out there, but people being able to articulate what their skill set is and how we can translate that into the roles that we need is where it's getting difficult, of knowing how experienced are they. People still think of themselves when they do portfolios of showing the end result rather than the ideation behind it. Our most valuable asset is the way that we think to solve a problem, not the execution, I personally feel.
I think I represent another environment where there's great benefit in working together interdisciplinary. So in our consultancy, we have platform architects and we have business strategists, we have analytics gurus. So I think when you work in a consultancy as a UX designer, you have that benefit of branching out and really understanding the bigger picture of what you're building there, how the product fits into the business, how it's performing, what it's delivering, and the overall intention of the company. We try to always embed a lot of purpose into our work and a lot of learning. And I find that the best way to retain people is to give them lots to learn and sort of reflect, and also time to, as a team, reflect on what they have achieved and how they could be doing better. And then also give them flexibility, like you were saying, Bridget, to cross over and to do a different pathway. And luckily, our team is large enough that you can actually go from interaction design into service design, product design, into content, into strategy. It really makes you a more well-rounded creative, if that's your intention.
I had a customer ask, we were talking about a similar type of problem with staffing, and he said to me, we have loads of people that can make stuff look good, and they can even create the actual interface, but they have a problem designing in the Z-axis, actually understanding the full depth of the why do we need to have this, why do we need to have this actual interaction. Instead of just executing on a job sheet that says, I want you to design this. How does that, how do we find people that can design in the Z-axis and think in advance? This is like, these are the senior people, right? This has got to be a limited skill. Is it a harder thing? Is this something we can teach? Is this where we should be focused? And making things look good, right? This is something that's been happening for hundreds of years, but being able to make something functional and look good at the same time, it seems to be this magic sauce.
Yeah. And I think mostly you're right. I think that the more senior you are, the more you have the ability to see further, think strategically, be dropped into a situation, again, particularly on client side, internally, to be dropped into a situation where you're working out the brief, you're working out the direction, you're working out the activities, the scope, the deliverables, working with senior stakeholders, influencing those senior stakeholders because they think UX has been around for 2 to 3 years, being customer-led rather than technology or viability-led. There's a lot of things we're asking them to do, right? And I think that they are things that more naturally lend themselves to people that have been in the game for a while and have gained the life experience around the doing part of the projects, that they've been able to see how they might be able to kind of influence, how they might be able to think more strategically about where that needs to go, and not just execute on the more interactional or visual kind of elements of it. Just looking at the crowd, can you put your hand up if you are a UX designer, or if it's kind of close enough to a label that you would use? You say, yeah, kind of like, I'm going to call that, a fifth, guys, maybe a quarter? Mm-hmm. And harking back to what we were just talking about, how many people used to be a UX designer and are now CX or service designers? Okay, almost no one. That doesn't prove my point, guys. Oh, gosh.
You could have lied.
Okay, well, how many people are UI designers or visual designers or more kind of interaction
sort of a few low hands. Is that like?
I know. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, a few. Yeah, potentially. And how many of those guys are looking to kind of transition into UX or have transitioned into UX? Yeah, okay.
There's a few more, right?
Yeah, almost the biggest hands in the room, right? So I often think that UX is kind of sandwiched in the middle a little bit, right? Because you've got people who might have started from a graphic design or a front-end dev point of view, who have become sort of UI or visual designers, and they kind of look at where those UXs are, and they're kind of earning a bit more money, and they're kind of thinking a bit more strategically about this, and they're further up the pipe, so I'll go there. But they don't necessarily get the opportunity to go there because they're not being given a shot. And then all the UXs are leaving because they're seeing further up the pipe here that look at what those CX and those service designers get to do. They're getting to be more like what these product managers are doing, right? They're starting to work through...
And earning the massive money, right?
Yeah, the big bucks over here, yeah? That they can see, that they can start to look at the high level of customer behaviour, what kind of things we should be designing for, not just we've worked out it needs to be a blah, go design it. They're helping to define what that is, and they're working more strategically up the pipe again. So I see UX as this kind of weird, in some ways at the moment, middle ground that not many people seem to be occupying. But it's those guys that I'm looking to be strategic to go into those projects. Okay, yes, someone said it's going to be a blah, it's going to be a mobile app, it's going to be, they've worked out the very, very kind of high level. It's really tough for me to find those people that are either haven't already disappeared to become product managers or product owners or CX or service designers, and people that can think strategically enough that might have come through from maybe a UI or interaction point of view. To really think strategically around what we want that to be. And that's not an answer. I don't know how we solve for that, Jamie. And how do we teach for that beyond time and exposure? I'm sure there's a better answer than time and exposure, but it's one that I've seen work successfully. I mean, millennials don't like time and exposure because it takes too long.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge.
They've lost interest by the time they get to the exposure part, right?
Is anyone in the audience, does anyone have a really pressing problem at the moment? Does somebody, please.
Ooh, that was quick.
My question surrounds around experience design as a business value. Now, you guys, from all the companies that you represent or work at, I mean, you have the luxury to have 50 plus UX designers or designers per se. What about small to medium businesses? I mean, my question actually reminds me of the experience being a graphic designer in the past, where it's either a luxury to have a graphic designer or you outsource it. But the fact that experience design, in my personal belief, it has to be started right from the top, not just a design team, so that the culture really integrates, kind of breathe that kind of way of thinking, if you like. How much of the small to medium businesses you believe have been embracing this kind of new culture way of thinking? And if not, what would you suggest that they have to do?
So I'll have a stab at it. You pointed to the solution, which is really the leadership from the very top. And by that I mean not the CEO or the founder of that small to medium business sort of suddenly getting their hands stuck in a prototyping software. I mean that they're meticulously concerned with the experience that their customers have with their service or product. And that they truly understand the different journeys that people take to buying this product, using it, coming back to it, having an issue with it, how it's resolved, how they tell others about it. All these partnership aspects, maybe also B2B is a big field that we don't talk about often enough. So that needs to be on the agenda and needs to be communicated by that person. And if that company has only 50 people, I wouldn't say that you necessarily need to have a wireframing expert or an information architect to then sort of take that in-house and sort of turn that solution around, but it's rather that more people like the product management, like the business people, the marketing people, the sales people, they do understand the customer really well. All of them do, and all of them keep meeting them and hearing about them and try to support solutions. And when that solution comes from outside, either from people like us or others, or with a temporary team, with a contract team, that's a second question. I think that's my answer to this.
I think that a lot of small and medium enterprises are entrepreneurial, lean kind of startups, and that is almost the template for how those guys get set up. They go, well, we need to be customer obsessed, we need to focus around the customer-led, it comes from the customer. And they have naturally, they followed, Lean Startup 101, and that's what they did. So I think that rather than looking to big corporates, I think that our regular small and medium enterprises should be looking at kind of startups and how they worked. I also think that type in CX economics into Google and watch that explode, and start to get your hands on the kind of data that business listen to, because I talk a lot in my business around design thinking, human-centered design, double diamond, desirability, viability, feasibility, and that it's the sweet spot in the middle. They do not care. They don't care. What they care about is their return on investment. They care about things like if our NPS goes up, it's not just about making our customers happy or more satisfied. That has a direct correlation to the bottom line. It's about looking to the McKinseys and the HBRs of the world who tell us things like a highly satisfied customer sounds great, but you know what? If you can drive an emotional connection and a fully connected customer experience, that is going to be, on average, 52% more valuable to you than that highly satisfied customer. So actually don't worry about getting from, not satisfied to highly satisfied. Think about getting from highly satisfied to emotionally connected. 52%. I mean, it's extraordinary. If you break that down to household cleaning products, it's something like 103%. If you can somehow emotionally connect with people buying a household cleaning product, you'll get 103% more value out of them. I mean, that is hugely compelling for businesses of any size and any scale to understand that. But they would be the two things that I would encourage small and medium businesses to look at. Look at companies that are of similar size that are entrepreneurial, startup, lean kind of mentality, because that's how they started and how they're going and how they're continuing to go. And look at the economics of CX and give them kind of the bottom line numbers that are hugely compelling.
I think it's also focusing on the outbound rather than inbound, thinking about what the audience want from you rather than what you can provide them. So it's like ask the questions, what would they like us to do, rather than what do we need to achieve as a business. Then you're trying to find the middle ground. And if you were sort of talking about how do I get them, it's more about a change management internally of a way of thinking rather than the UX being. The UX is a solution, part of a solution, rather than being how do we change our mentality as a business to start thinking differently. It's about getting that change in through the door first to then encourage the next few steps, which means that how do we talk to our audience, how do we know what they want, and that's where the UX starts to sort of slowly creep in. It's a solution to get to that end rather than it sort of, you're never going to get someone in your organization until you make them realize the value of what they're trying to achieve, which is the return on investment, and then that can be helped by having an internal resource that can make that change. I think it's a much shorter answer.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Does anyone?
Doesn't ask us another question.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there anyone else?
The question's probably aimed at Hoyle, but feel free to weigh in, others on the panel. So. Going back to what, Bridget, you were mentioning, there's, I think, a question around maturity in the UX. So I manage a UX team, and there's a question around maturity as well within these individual specializations. So every UI person I interview wants to become a UXer. Every UXer wants to become a CXer. Every CXer wants to become a transformation head, etc. It never ends, right? But then I tell the UI guys that I meet that Jacob Nielsen's a UIer, right? And so, you can be a superb person in your own field rather than trying to mimic someone else, right? But a personal conundrum that I wanted to talk about is seeing this field of design-led product management, which I kind of think is what Hoyle you're doing, as it's kind of emerging, right? And so, you could go down the UX path and continue maturing as a UXer and maybe manage a team or something, or go down this product management path. But personally, I feel that, as soon as there's a product management label, it, in my head, becomes too close to, Scrum, and you become a product owner, and suddenly you're thinking about delivery rather than the strategic part. So I'm very keen to hear your experience around that and, why you chose that field versus design, if that was ever an option for you.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, I think we just threw out like 20 buzzwords, right? And I think you really just have to simplify it to the 5 questions that you asked about anything, even writing a piece of paper in grade school, right? Who, what, when, where, why. So if if product management figures out the what it is that we're going to build, and engineering figures out the when, how fast can we build it, and so those are siloed a little bit, but product management feeds a lot from customers and design and engineering on the what. So now we have the why, which is often led by product management, as well as a lot of help from design. But I think the toughest question out of all of those is how it's going to work. The world is increasingly more global, which means that there's more competitors. And, for example, I'm not a customer, but I'm assuming National Australia Bank and Commonwealth Bank and all these other financial institutions, when you're really looking at the offerings for what they are in terms of financial products, they're probably not all that different.
And way better.
So I mean, it's really, then it becomes, what are the things that will help differentiate you, right? And what are the things that you're more driven by? So I think for me, I think of both engineering and design as partners. When it comes to product management, it's really, I don't make any of the decisions. I put people who are really, really, really awesome at their jobs in the right position to collectively come up with the right decisions. And I often am not the driver of a conversation towards an end result that I want to have. Rather, I'm driving towards a resolution of something that everyone is collectively talking about. So I think for me, it first comes in a deep-rooted respect for all the different disciplines. And also not limiting to yourself to a specific keyword or a specific silo or a specific frame of thinking. At the end of the day, we're all people trying to solve problems for other people. For me, I happen to really, really enjoy building something with people and putting them in a position where they can succeed and we can really do the right thing for our customers. So that's the reason why I chose down the path that I did. But I work with really talented designers that I really, really respect. There's two awesome, awesome kick-ass women, and I, could not do any of the things that I do or any of the things that we do without them. So, yeah.
I'm not sure if I read into your question slightly differently as well. It's kind of thing. We used to have a very clear path of your career when sort of in the 80s and 90s, and then with the UX, what happened is that we suddenly just all became UX designers, and there was no really variation of all the different skill sets that each person had individually that was articulated into our title. And I think titles are becoming less and less relevant. I know I really change mine every year just for the hell of it, because I think of myself as a creative thinker. My skill is how to think about things differently, and how can I put that into a title. And I think what's happened is people think the next progression from being UI is UX, then UX is CX, and CX is SD, and then it's product designer, and it's product strategist. And they're all totally different roles that do totally different things, but there is a little bit of overlap. And we keep thinking that is the career progression, but it isn't. You can still be a UXer and be in a career path that is up here, then down here, and still have the same title. And that's still hard for us all to articulate that, to realize that your value isn't in your title, it's in your creative thinking.
Is it linear though? Is there a linear path?
Absolutely not.
Or can you jump from one and sort of fast forward and fast track that career?
No, I don't know. It's more of it's not linear, and it's also, you may start to realize that as you get better and better at your skill within the field, that what you're doing is no longer user experience, it is customer experience. But that's something you just morph and change to fit the role and the position that you're in, and what is required of you to be successful in whatever product or whatever career path you're going, and try and forget about the title. It's just more about being people, solving problems for other people. So of my own team, we're trying to do reviews, and then people want to change their title. I'm like, but what's the value in it? We're trying to get rid of the word senior, because it doesn't really mean anything. It's senior in age, or senior like it used to be, or is it senior in years in the industry, or is it senior in how much your skill set is? But everyone's skill set is slightly different, so how can you be more senior than that person when you got a slightly different skill set? We've kind of got caught up on that. We kind of came into that UX environment. Everyone called themselves UX designers. Then where do you go? Do you call senior, or do you go call customer experience designer? And we don't know what it is yet, so we're all still trying to figure it out. And just maybe it's okay to not have your career path is your experience and your knowledge and your problem solving, rather than it being the title that's at the bottom of your name.
How do you reconcile that though with rate cards and what you charge clients? Do you need me to say that again?
No, yeah, so we have a rate card, and it's more we got a flat rate for the studio. Unless it's me, I charge twice as much, but it's more not because I know more, it's because I've got more responsibility in the studio and I have to be away from it to be able to consult with you. So we're just trying to flat rate, and then if it's medial tasks, then editing or things that don't require a skill set, but it's a very specific one, then it's slightly lower because we can all kind of chip in.
I don't see any hands up. Oh, there's a hand.
Hi. I was just wondering what advice you'd give someone who was, in my case, a more traditional graphic branding designer wanting to move into UX design, like in terms of training or experience.
I would ask you why you want to move into UX.
Well, I did a 1-week course at Academy XI and just loved it. So it's more just excited by it and seeing like what I feel like what I'm doing is right at the end of the process. I feel like it can be kind of up here, like influencing what actually happens rather than trying to like kind of brand it and sell it at the end.
I came from a print background way back when. Quark Express you were talking about? Oh yeah.
I remember the marching robot. A lot of people don't know what the
Deluxe
marching
Paint
robot is.
Pro was my first paint design tool on an Apple II that we had to share between 34 people. So you got 15 minutes a week to use a computer. And I'm not even that old. This is how quickly it's evolved. You have to, if you want to, I think being in print and doing graphic design, actually in today's society it's kind of come full circle if you're wanting to sort of do core UX of being interface focused. We now used to have the screen it could be any size, but we've slowly gone back to having a mobile screen, a tablet screen, a laptop, a desktop. All those skills of pixels of picas and points have become pixels and sort of a general width. So you've actually got a leg up already in thinking of UX because you already understand formatting for different variations of portrait and landscape and placement and visual focus. And so you've already you've actually probably got more skill than you know. It's just knowing how to apply it into the digital platforms. So that's when you start playing with things like just having and trying, even if you do internships, like we do a paid internship every 8 weeks. I think we've got a new person every 8 to 9 weeks. And try and get yourself in it. Listen to podcasts. I listen to podcasts every day. I kind of took a weird skew towards crime podcasts for some reason. I don't know why. But that came about from Bogue World, which is a UX-focused podcast. So he mentioned it, and I thought I went on this weird tangent, as I always do, as I'm doing right now. But just immerse yourself. Look for things there are. I buy Wired magazine. I get a paper magazine, which is actually outdated by the time I get it, but it's because I will actually read it and I can fold a page down and go back to it later rather than trying to look at it on my screen. And so it's just finding those little points that you can get into understanding it better, watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading magazines, seeing who's doing the best in the environment, looking at their work and studying why does everyone think they're amazing and they're not? What are the variations? Is it because of the layouts? Is it because of their documentation? Is it because of the research way that they found the research? You'll start to sort of bring yourself up to speed. And then, like I was saying, you start to then show your thinking rather than the end result. Graphic design is quite often about showing the illustration or showing the end piece. And your thinking is lost. And that's why I always remember thinking, why does anyone value everyone just sees the output and forgets that there was an idea that had to be invented to create that output in the first place. And then UX is kind of all about showing that thinking and educating why it came to that point and validating it rather than just being an idea. And so you can get yourself across, you can bring yourself to speed quicker.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about the future. Oh, sorry, have you got a question? Yeah. And then I just want to talk a little bit about the future before we end.
Just on that question, was it more about the fact that you don't get recognized for it, being a traditional designer moving into UX, more so than like by industry? Because I find that, because I come from a traditional design background, I find like industry doesn't respect traditional graphic designers as UX designers because they're looking for a UX designer. They're looking for the title, right? Because I've done probably 90% of the work we do today is all UX, but I don't come from a UX background. I come from a traditional design background. And then with considerations of moving back into the workforce, applying for jobs at UX, they're like senior designer, or traditional graphic designer, and then they just pigeonhole you. Was that kind of where you're... Sorry? Oh, try to get it, yeah.
I mean, I can't talk for the whole industry. For me, technical skills come fourth when I'm looking. 1 is mindset, 2 is passion, 3 is business competencies, right? Can you influence a stakeholder? Can you think strategically about something? Are you a kick-ass communicator? Bleep that if you need to, sorry. And before that, it's passion. what podcasts are you listening to? How are you getting out there? What have you done past the 1 week XI course? Do you pick up Wired magazine once a month, etc.? And first and foremost, it's mindset. Do you truly believe that we need to be customer obsessed, customer led, customer focused, customer before all else? Do we need to pivot and organise our structures around what our customers want and need from us? If you can nail those three, then I'm looking at the technical competencies, and I don't mind if you come from a design background that's not a UX background at all, but set yourself design challenges that are UX design challenges. How would I redesign cruise control in a car? I mean, whatever it happens to be disciplined about setting yourselves little kind of design tasks to tackle from a UX point of view to make that muscle work until you get a job that allows you to continue to do that every day.
Can I try?
Yeah, of course, quick? Yeah, man.
So I think one thing to be really cognizant of is there's a inflection point where you learn the academics of it a little bit too much. And I think it's important to know when that point is and to know that there's diminishing returns that come with that. So personal story is I was talking with a person who heads up all of product for XD, and we're talking, and very British way of putting it, but he says, Hoyle, I think you are the most academically well-versed person in product management I know. And I walked away with what the hell are you saying, Andrew? And like really thinking about it afterwards, it was that, there's no substitute for doing, right? And I mean, self-plug here, but like at XD, we do UX challenges all the time. And, there's a lot of other websites and services that do a daily one. So just there's nothing, it's really great to get and read and know what it is that you need to do. But once there's sort of that foundational layer there's no substitute that's better than doing. And personally speaking for me, I stopped reading for like a little while because it was getting too much to my head. So anyway, sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
No, it's a really good point. I wanted to pose two conversation points that hinge a little bit towards the future. So we've got our Wayback Machine and we're pointing towards the future now. And the first one is there seems to be, as I travel around to see customers, and it doesn't matter how big they are, there seems to be a certain amount of anxiety towards massive change, as in what is the next way we're going to be communicating with each other. There is no way of predicting that. How do we get ourselves ready for it? Because it's coming. And it's coming faster and faster and faster every single day. That's one conversation point. The other one is, a thought process around the actual future. Where do we see ourselves in, I used to say 5 years, but now I say 12 months, right? Because 12 months is even hard to predict now. How do we see the industry and how it's being portrayed? How do we see that industry in 12 months' time versus the run of the mill today?
My particular passion lies around transparency and trust. I think trust is the basis for the intense connection with any product and service, and it's very human to want to trust a product or service or a company or a brand. And so what I think we need to achieve over the next 12 months is really how do we ethically, inclusively, fairly share, acquire, and use data about our customers or partners in that case, and really in the UX process, how do we make that visible? It's very hard sometimes when you use a banking app or any other app to really know which data is traveling where and why does this bank app or this other app sort of suggest certain things to me. And how we can do that effectively so that it doesn't become intrusive and gets on your nerves, but at the same time gives you full empowerment and gives you that beautiful moment of choice where you're saying, like, yes, I want to tell you this, and yes, please keep on using this for my convenience or for better service, and that the services just don't do that on their own, and me always leaving with a taste of, I don't know what they're really doing with this data, and is this really beneficial to me? So I think that's a big topic for us.
Awesome.
I think it was probably maybe 5 or 6 years ago that we first saw that people started to say, well, companies aren't going to differentiate on price anymore, and they're not differentiating on product anymore, they're going to differentiate on experience. 5, 6 years, does that feel about right? Maybe? About there. And sort of 2 or 3 years after that, I started thinking about, well, it's not just about really good experience, it's about connected and seamless experiences, right? End to end, being able to get through. Someone yesterday in the keynotes was talking about the Virgin experience, might have been Brad. It's great from booking the flight to getting on the plane to, getting my baggage at the carousel. It's fantastic. And that's where we need to differentiate. And I think that there are very few players out there that do that well. I would love to say that that is where the differentiated field of play is right now, but I still actually think that's in the future because we're all pretty crap.
Sure.
But beyond that, once we nail that, echoing partly what Tim's saying, I think it's about authentic experiences, and I think it's about community and socially aware and responsible experiences. And I think it's about emotionally connected experiences. So I think that's the field that we need to play in. Once we work out how to be connected and seamless through our customer journeys, that's where we need to play.
Awesome.
I think we're all on the same page here. It's trust and empathy, I think, are the most important parts. And that seamless experience that we all keep talking about, the omni-channel that I've heard for years that I've never actually seen.
No, we just can't do it.
Oh, God. Yeah. Sorry, I'm breathing into the mic. The conversation with a customer or a people is slowly, we all got sucked into the screen and we started staring at this screen and we're thinking about user experience and then it's all inside this screen and then it's slowly stepped away and now we're looking at it, what device are they holding while they're on that, looking at that screen, and then we stepped away again and we go, where are they stood while they're looking at this screen, can they read it in this light? And then it stepped away again and said, well, how is their environment affecting how they interact with this information? And that's sort of, we're getting closer to the good point and getting into that. That's what we need to sort of focus on. I think that's what we're focusing on the next 12 months. It's more about the whole holistic environment and the interaction with that experience and how it affects their environment as well is slowly becoming, we're trying to figure it out and we haven't quite managed to get it. No, I don't think anyone's got there yet. We all worry about having that walking past a sign and it projects, I think get crazy ideas of looking at my phone where it's using my facial recognition to unlock it. That's going to start happening on adverts, like as I'm stood at a tram stop waiting to catch it, it's going to start showing me that. And we're all worried and trying to figure out how to make it all happen because we've seen it in movies, and just getting away from that, going, how does it make our lives better? How is it that empathize with the audience? How do people trust it and know that it's okay? And it's not just about projecting that it's okay. Actually, people knowing that it's okay, because we're all got that suspicion in the back of our mind these days, and it's trying to get rid of that suspicion. You're using Google, like how are they using this information? Like how am I, the Apple and the Android world, like Google are sending your information over the internet, and then it's coming back to give you a better result. But it's actually servicing you better, whereas Apple will say it's all on the device here. And we're trying to figure out that bridge of where do we want to sit with all of this information to make it useful for us, as well as guiding our people who are providing a service to provide a better service to us. So it's progressing slowly.
I think there's an interesting, I wasn't sure what sort of answer I was going to get. I thought I was going to get the answer from the panel around connected experiences. So I did get that, but I think there's a word that now goes in front of it, which I wasn't expecting, authentic connected experiences. Does that sound about right? I mean, this is what it is, right?
And when you look at that's the experiences that we're putting out, if I also kind of crystal ball for our workplaces, if you were at the keynote yesterday morning, you would have seen Sensei, and we all just kind of went, when we saw that mask, right? The mask that just hours done in, seconds. But I think that a kind of colliding of gig economy and automation, and I don't know kind of how that's going to look in our workplaces yet, but, a lot of us offshore parts of our studios already.
Yeah.
What does that look like when we onshore and we've got, automation doing that for us? Yes, it absolutely frees us up to think more strategically, do the stuff that, that we still believe will get us to the creative aspects that we like doing. I just had that weird flashback to again the keynote yesterday where I looked at the artificial intelligence like 2 steps above the human, and like my heart started beating faster, and I was like, wait, no, they're going to do everything, right? AI's going to do everything, but automation and gig economy and kind of mix that together in our creative workplaces, and what does that look and feel like? I'm grappling with that at the moment to kind of work out what that's going to look like in future.
Has anybody got any questions? Oh, there's one.
Yeah, I had a question which actually ties very nicely to what you were just talking about how AI and gig economy will turn out. One of the things that I've been grappling with personally is how to make design scale, and how to literally how to make this scale big in the way that essentially engineering has been able to scale big with the tools that it has, with the just with the fact that cloud exists. What is the, I guess, conceptual cloud equivalent for design? How do we make design exist across people's brains, make it accessible? How do we give people agency? All of those things. How does design go from a small, mid-sized business, and even if it has a seat at the table there, how does it go to 100,000 people business?
Yeah, we've been talking about the connection of the Creative Cloud and the Experience Cloud. In the future, we will have a workflow that allows you to work at scale, even though you're in the way strategic user experience design, visual design space. You will see the immediate impact, and you will see that much faster than you do now. At the moment, there's a handover, and there's a style guide, and there's a repository, and there's a digital asset management, and whatnot, and there's always a delay until it hits the customer, and in the future, we will have a much shorter way between the two. Theoretically, you can apply that to small and big units, together with offshoring and onshoring and a blend of the two. I see absolutely no reason why we wouldn't be able to scale design. We already do that with living style guides, things that are really design system oriented, code based. I'm personally very, very optimistic about this because it frees us up from all these tasks that previously kept us from doing real design, which was just playing design police and arguing about executions and all these things. If you can think conceptually, strategically, establish rules, principles, have the right assets in the right place, and then match data to it, analytics, to optimize against that while staying within the design space that you've defined, then it actually allows us to do much more interesting work.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think it's designers and developers, that relationship has always been really interesting, right? Designers will make something visual, and then they'll kind of throw it over the fence to developers. Developers will make something, and most of the time it's not exactly the thing that was created visually, and then there's just sort of back and forth over the fence. You're like playing volleyball at this point. And there's a handoff, right? And there's a handoff because there's actually, if you think about a dynamic of where does the source of truth lie? Is the source of truth this design that I've created? Is the source of truth the code? And I think that's something that is super buzzy right now and everybody's sort of talking about. But I mean, if we really take a step back and we look at it, you really want there to be one source of truth. It would be great if your design was also a living, breathing thing that was entrenched in code. It would be really great if designers who think creatively about how to create something visually, and developers who think really creatively about how to make something that works elegantly, if there was more of a handshake between the two parties rather than a handoff. Those are the things that really excite me as I come in and work every day. And one of the things that's awesome about XD is that the entire design team designs XD and XD, and then the entire team that develops it, I mean, we dog food every single thing that we do because we're our own customers as well. And so, in a sense, it's also helping to solve our problems. And so, yeah, I think it's just really bridging the gap between and kind of having the two parties know that you're both two sides of the same coin, as opposed to a whole left brain, right brain mindset.
And for me, it's probably on the other side to the tools, there's sort of that ways of working and process and structure and all of that sort of stuff that I'm probably grappling with at the moment. I fight the good fight every day on getting the seat at the table, right? You talked about 100,000 people, companies, and what does that look like with regards to design teams and the level of influence that you have within those organisations. NAB's only 35,000 people, but it's big. I'm running an enterprise team of 120 designers, which I guess is big, but in the context of 35,000 people, not so much. But what I've
highly
really...
visual though, right? As in...
Yeah. Well, we
those 35,000 people get to see the results of your work every day.
Yeah, it's lovely. We saw it on the screen yesterday. I was so proud. I saw the NAB app and I was like congratulating myself and going, look at me. And then forgot to take a photo of the actual slide.
We'll get the slide to you, don't worry.
Appreciate it. But those ways of working, what I've grappled with is that I come from a practitioner background, from a technical and a skill background, and suddenly I'm needing to be a business leader working out how to create processes for designers. The word process and designer is they don't naturally have a lot of fun together. And so I'm grappling with working out how to create a team, scale it, and build processes and ways of working, not just around our team, but in the way that the organisation is telling me we are doing our ways of working and processes. And I can show you a slide that's delightful that tells me that I've got three-way leadership within NAB delivery at the moment, and it's what, when and how, and the what is a product owner, the when is a delivery lead, the how is a lead architect. I'm like, well, I'm not any of those three. Where do I fit in, right? Where does design fit in with our new three-way leadership? It doesn't. So, yes, we have a large team. We've been given the wonderful opportunity to build a massive capability within NAB. We've got our fingers in all sorts of pies. But it is a daily struggle and a daily battle to work out how we want processes and ways of working to work with the design team when it's not naturally, I actually spend time in Excel and things like that at the moment. Right? But also to reconcile that with how the organisation is telling us to run as well. So it doesn't answer the question, but I think it's something that there's a lot of us grappling with at the moment, and it's something that we've got to work through.
Sure. We're almost out of time, right? 5 minutes. That's awesome. Has anyone got any more questions? Okay. So I want to go back a little bit and just talk about the anxiety stuff. We as I talk to our customers, the what's coming next seems to be at the moment seems to be a reactionary thing. And as a new platform or something new comes out at the moment, it's all voice because everyone's getting voice-activated things in their homes. We have two different types. We have an Apple version and a Google version, and we've tried to get them to talk to each other, and apparently they won't. But we're talking to these devices. What's the anxiety? Like, how do we prepare ourselves for these next things constantly over and over?
I think it's the unknown. When the voice navigation came out, if that's the right term, probably not. You were thinking, well, how do I translate my skill set into that new medium? And the shorter answer is you don't. It still works. It's just a different output at the end. You've still got the same way of thinking. You're just trying to articulate into an audio version rather than a visual version. You still got to answer the same questions, and it's just trying to get rid of that angst and that nervousness of how to do it, and then do you need to do it? I think if you're thinking of a banking app, do you want to be saying your things out in the open towards other people, or like the Google? I'd like the Google version because it connects with Spotify, and I don't have an Apple account, But it's just I started playing with it and realized, this isn't actually much different from making decisions on a screen that it is. It just means you've got to think about it and ask the right question, right? And then it's our job to make the interface understand it easier to communicate with, so that we know what the terminology is and we know what the words is. Like Siri, come on, please? I can ask it to call my wife, and it'll start saying, locating
Yes, that's
such and such in California. I'm like, what? That doesn't even sound the same. So it is getting better, but it's more that these technologies are changing and evolving, and as we sort of the devices and the products that we start to use sort of articulate this into our daily life, we'll realize that there's not much. It's just an evolution of the same thing in a different medium. So it's not there's no nervous. There shouldn't be any nervousness about it. You'll figure it out pretty quick.
Okay. With a minute to go, I'd love to finish on a question. If anyone's got anything they'd like to ask anyone.
I could actually, I want to chime in on the thing that we were just talking about. I think the problem with these things is that whenever a new technology gets created, the way of designing an experience for that is often developed by the engineering team that comes up with that technology or a partner team of that engineering team. So if we look at, for example, voice, right? If we look at voice and how people design for the Google Assistant today, you basically have to know code pretty extensively. UI is relatively familiar if you have a solid foundational technical knowledge. But the average person that's designing an Alexa skill, maybe they're just trying to experiment, does not have access to that. And I think the fear behind these things is not knowing what they are, but it's also that the workflows are not democratized in a way that all of us can really understand what they are and or create for them. And when you really think about it, the scary piece isn't actually talking to the things. It's how much control the respective companies that are creating these things have. So if you think about Alexa, for example, you ask Alexa to show you something that you want to buy new pillowcases, right? When you go on Google or you go on Amazon and you look up pillowcases, there's a set of 100 results that you can go through. But when you're repeating it, when Alexa's repeating it back to you, you probably don't want to hear 100 results. Heck, you probably don't even want to hear 2. You want to hear 1. And so the power of defaults in these things becomes so important. And that goes back to the conversation that we were having before regarding trust and ethics. Why is it that Airbnb is a service that allows people into your own homes and charges them? And that's a more trusted service than Facebook, where we've been using it and all of our friends are on it. Literally every single person. Like, I can't figure out a way to delete my Facebook account.
It's 32 steps.
Yeah. So I think...
Is that right?
I think it might be 31. I think it's 31 or 32 steps.
These are all things that we think about because, I mean, it's Adobe Experience Design. It's not Adobe Experience Screen Interaction Design, right? And the only ways that we make these technologies more accessible, more friendly, and more democratic is if designers are the ones that are helping to shape the future of them. And so that makes me really excited. And we have some interesting things in the works that we'll reveal sort of later on this year in these fields. But super excited for it.
It's a nice way to finish. I want to thank you all very much for coming and being panelists, and thank you everyone for coming and joining. I hope that the conversation has been enlightening for everyone, and we're around for a little bit. If you've got any questions, come up and see us. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.